In the cold mountains of North Carolina, where morning fog still clings to the old wooden fences, an aging man lives quietly with his 3 loyal dogs. Once a rescuer, now he speaks only to the wind and the crackle of his fire. But that night, between the familiar howls, came a sound unlike any other, weak, trembling, desperate. When he stepped into the dark to find it, he had no idea that one small choice would change the rest of his life forever. The Smoky Mountains breathed a thin mist that clung to fences and low brush, soft as milk. Noah's dogs lifted their heads to the moon and loosed a steady, practiced howl. In the pause between notes, another sound slipped in, raw, small, not quite canine. It quivered like a torn thread in cold air. A voice, unsure it belonged to the night at all. The dogs went still, ears pricked, listening harder than men do. He clicked off the porch light and let darkness teach his eyes. The pasture was a spill of silver, wire glinting, dew beading on rye. Ranger trotted first, Scout close, Echo lagging with the careful rhythm of age. The strange cry came again, closer now, a hushed scrape of breath. Noah tasted metal on his tongue, the old rescue reflex flushing back as if the hills had called his name. Beside the gravel road, the mist thinned and the world grew too clear. A doe-grey shape lay at the ditch line, ribs dimly outlined, fur matted with the dull shine of impact. The mother's paw rested open, as if blessing the ground. Under her flank, something pale shuddered, 2 round ears, no bigger than coins. A kitten's head lifted, mouth opening to the cold and closing on nothing. The cub's coat was moonlit tan tipped with frost, but the eyes, those unsteady marbles, held a fierce, uncertain light. It tried to push from under the weight that was no longer warm, its paws splayed, claws soft as new thorns, slipping on wet stone. The sound it made was smaller than a cry and larger than a breath, a wild syllable that did not know what species to be. Ranger planted himself between road and ditch, chest out, an old oath rekindled. Scout circled tight, sniffing the air where fear and gasoline mixed. Echo, who always felt what hurt, lay down near the cub and lowered her muzzle until steam from her nose warmed the kitten's whiskers. Noah knelt, the earth soaked through his jeans, a cold he recognized from other midnights and other saves. He slid his hand beneath the mother's shoulder and lifted enough for the cub to wriggle free. The tiny body weighed less than the glove he wore, bones and tremor, that was most of it. Up close, the kitten's spots were ink dots, scattered by a nervous hand. Its heartbeat fluttered, wild and thin against his palm. A bird trapped in a dark jar, and then steadied, counting him in. Noah knew the rules. Call it in, stand back, let the forest answer herself. He pictured the laminated card in his old kit, the line about not imprinting, the warnings in rigid black type. But he also saw Echo's eyes, soft and certain, reflecting a lesson older than ink. The cub turned its head into his jacket, more scent than sight, and shivered hard enough to move his arm. He spoke nothing grand, only a low thread of warmth. Easy, kid, easy. The dogs kept a respectful distance, as if the porch had turned into a chapel. All at once the pasture seemed lit from underneath, as if the soil remembered everything it had ever held. He stood with the kitten against his chest, feeling its ribs count the seconds, and began the walk back to the porch light he had left off. Inside, the house exhaled cedar and dust. He set the cub in a towel-lined crate by the stove and fed the fire with split oak. Flame rose, glass fogging, sparks ticking like distant rain. The kitten stretched a paw toward heat, claws barely catching on the weave, then tucked itself into a comma, listening to wood settle. Its breath came in 2 quick notes, then a longer one, the music of surviving. Echo eased down beside the crate, chin on the rim, a sentry who had earned the right to rest and refused it. Ranger patrolled the kitchen, checking shadows like doors. Scout lay under the window, where the moon drew its own square on the floor. The house had been too quiet for too long, and now the quiet had a pulse in it. Noah stood with his hands uselessly open, then reached for the kettle. Steam threaded into the rafters, thin as the mountain fog had been. He slipped a dropper into warm water, then closer to the kitten's lip. The first attempt failed. The second, a flicker of tongue. The third brought a swallow as shy as dawn. The kitten paused, surprised by its own success, then tried again. Noah felt his shoulders unspool in increments he could not name. The night lengthened. He sat on the floor with his back against the cabinet, boots still wet, watching the rise and fall of fur no bigger than his palm. Once, wind shouldered the house and the rafters groaned. The kitten startled and reached out, finding Echo's nose and holding on like a sailor to a rope. Echo didn't move, didn't even blink, as if promised to this small, uncertain map of life. When the kettle cooled and the fire settled into its red thoughts, Noah cracked the back door. The pasture shone the way it had before everything complicated itself. He could still see the ditch line in his mind, the raised paw, the hush. Behind him, the kitten turned onto its side, belly exposed to warmth, a trust both undeserved and exact. He closed the door softly, as if not to wake a vow. He took his harmonica from the hook by the sink, then stopped, the metal cold in his hand. It had been months since he'd let sound find shape. He set it down again. Tonight was for silences that said more. The dogs, as if agreeing, shifted to deeper rest. Somewhere in the house's old bones, a small crack clicked and became still. The kitten breathed through it, unfazed, counting the house as safe. Toward first light, the moon thinned to a slice the color of bone. The cub woke and tried a sound it didn't know, a rough half purr, half call, the syllable of a creature learning its own edges. Echo answered with a breath, Ranger with the slow lift of his head, Scout with a tail thump like a soft drum. Noah smiled without witness, the kind that only the tired and lucky know. Morning would bring questions, with boots and badges and forms, a ring at the door from the world that writes rules. But before the day could measure him, Noah measured the small life in his care and found it worth the trouble. The kitten blinked at the stove glass, seeing fire move as if it were a living thing to be tracked. He whispered, "Barely. Stay." And for now, the wild agreed. Morning came gentle, rinsed in thin gold that slid over the pine rails and the faded porch swing. The kitten woke to warmth and the steady chorus of breath from 3 old dogs. He tested the room with his nose, first smoke, coffee, soap, fur, then blinked at the stove glass, where coals pulsed like small red hearts. The house felt larger than night, but not less mysterious. Noah moved slow, as if stirring the air might break something fragile. He dipped the dropper, checked the warmth against his wrist, and waited until the cub's mouth found it on its own. The swallow was stronger now. A deliberate sip, then a pause to consider victory. The dogs watched without leaning in, a ring of guardians practicing the art of not crowding hope. Echo stayed closest, chin resting on the crate's rim, eyes holding the patient shine of an old nurse. When the kitten tried to stand, she angled her shoulder so he could steady a paw. He wobbled, found the edge of towel and wood, then sat with a startled pride, as if sitting were a trick he had invented. The house answered with a small creak that sounded like approval. He discovered sunlight as if it were a scent. A stripe fell across the floor, and he slid into it, pressing his ribs flat, eyelids dozing, while his ears remained on duty. The warmth gathered beneath him like a secret. Every few breaths, he lifted his head and tracked dust motes that rose and fell in the beam, practicing the hunter's patience on prey that wasn't prey at all. When Noah stepped outside for wood, wind pressed through the gap under the door, and the kitten's whiskers trembled. He turned toward the draft, nostrils flaring, a map unrolling in his brain. Wet earth, distant water, deer he had never seen. Echo leaned closer until fur touched whisker, anchoring him to the here. He settled, torn between the door and the stove's small sun. The harmonica stayed on its hook until evening. After supper, Noah rinsed the metal and sat by the stove, head bowed as if asking permission. One easy note rose and drifted, thin as steam, and the dogs answered with a soft unison hum. The kitten lifted his face, ears pricked, eyes narrowing at the strange animal that lived in the man's hands, and made the room breathe. Another bar slid out, bent at the end like a smile. Ranger's tail thumped twice. Scout added a quiet thread. The kitten tried a sound and startled at his own voice, a rasp between purr and question. He tried again, found a tone a fraction higher, then mirrored the fall of Noah's note. It wasn't a howl yet. It was simply willingness, shaped into air. On the second night, he learned the geometry of stairs. One paw, then another, then too much confidence, and a quick slide to the bottom. Dignity scattered like kindling. Echo blocked the last step with her body. A soft stop. The kitten climbed her like a hill and paused at the summit, pulse drumming against her ear. She did not move, as if the hill had sworn to hold. Kate came on the third day, boots clean, eyes that saw both kindness and trouble. She carried a canvas bag that clicked with bottles when it moved. The kitten watched from the crate, head tilted, cataloguing keys, leather, citrus hand soap, the linger of barn straw. When she knelt, he slid back into towel shadow, sparked by a caution older than language and just as true. "This can't be home," she said softly to Noah. And then, after the exam, "He's stronger than you think." The fixed lines of warning softened into something like respect. The kitten reached toward the stethoscope's cool bell, bumping it with his nose, and Kate smiled without showing teeth. Echo wagged once, as if the vote had been counted and witnessed. Sheriff Wade's truck idled on the road that evening, engine a dull sermon. The kitten felt the bass in the floorboards before boots hit the steps. He sank behind the water bucket, eyes bright in the slatted shadow. Voices met on the porch policy and mercy, both speaking truths that didn't cancel each other. When the truck rolled away, his breath unrolled with it. Nights arranged themselves into a ritual. Fire lowered, dogs settled. Man rinsed the harmonica, and the kitten drifted to the edge of light. He would listen first, testing the rise of each phrase, then add his rough ribbon of sound. It grew cleaner, braver, then broke again, as wild notes do. The dogs shaped around him. Not a pack exactly, but something close to family. He practiced hunting on acceptable targets. A fallen pine cone, a thread loose from the rug, a moth that understood ceilings better than cats. Pounce, freeze, reconsider. He learned to take correction from Ranger's glance, to pause at Scout's warning, to hide his face in Echo's chest when thunder walked the ridge. Each lesson stuck the way birds do, quietly and for good. On a windless night, the moon rose wide and pale, the kind that pulls even furniture toward windows. Noah opened the back door and let the cold lie along the threshold. The kitten stepped to it and breathed the world, his body leaning forward while his back foot stayed inside. He made a sound, then throaty, tentative, pointed at nothing, and the dogs answered, low and steady. For a handful of long seconds, their notes braided. The kitten's voice wavered, then found a clearer line, not canine, not human, not quite cat. It was the sound of a bridge finding its first weight. Noah did not speak. He stood with one hand on the jamb and the other at his side, feeling the house and the hills agree. For now, the quiet could hold them all. The front field woke under a thin crust of frost, each blade sugared and stiff. Milo stepped into it with that careful heel-to-toe he'd learned indoors, testing cold like a new language. The dogs moved as one grey river at his flanks, noses low, steam rising. Far off, the ridge held its breath. Even the crows seemed to fold their voices and wait for weather to decide. He read the morning the way his kind reads it, scent first, then sound, then the thin pulse of movement along fence lines. A rabbit's line wrote itself across the ditch and vanished under briars. Milo paused, ears tilted to the narrowest angle, and felt the chase rise in his bones. Ranger gave the small cough that meant no. Milo sat, quivering with the agreement. By noon the sky tightened and the wind learned edges. Noah latched the gate and went for tools, a list in his head. Milo trailed Echo to the shade of the shed and found a sliver of sunlight shaped like a key. He slept with his chin on his paws, one eye half open, one ear hunting. When he woke, the air had changed colder, iron tasting, a coin pressed to the tongue. Dusk came quick as a pulled curtain. The herd scent returned, not deer this time, something older and hungrier that wore distance like a cloak. Scout rose first, a growl stitched tight in his throat. Ranger stood square, reading the line of trees as if it were print. Milo felt the fur along his spine flutter, each hair learning to listen for him. The sound arrived before the shapes did a pad through dead leaves that never hurried. A footfall that knew every route. Wolves, 2, then 3, ghost-colored, stepping sideways through shadow. Scout barked sharp. Ranger drove forward. Echo braced. Milo ate the picture in one swallow and leapt, small and wrong-sized for the job, but faster than his doubt. They hit the outer edge of the yard, where grass thinned to raw dirt. A grey wolf split the line and slipped for Scout's flank. Milo came from the side, a streak cut from the last of the day, claws swinging for the soft of the muzzle. He landed, held, then ripped down, a spark of his wild father he had never met, finding purchase in fur and heat and peril. The wolf snapped and shook, teeth bright silvers in the low light. Milo felt the world tilt and the sky go watery. He twisted free and rolled, came up on 3 paws and stood anyway. Scout's shoulder met the grey chest like a door. Ranger took the gap, a blunt, loyal force. For an inch of time, a hole opened where fear might have lived, and did not. Then the second wolf came in colder, a knife that understood ribs. Milo turned a heartbeat too late. Pain bloomed from a place without a room, hot and electric, and his front leg went soft. He made a sound he had never made, a small sound, private as shame, and still he struck back, a short, brutal rake that said, "Not now, not this one, not these." Noah's shout broke across them, the human chord that names things and refuses to stop naming. A shot cracked into the air like a drawn line. The wolves bent away, calculating the math of risk again. They dissolved into brush, leaving steam and the smell of pennies where breath had been. The silence after had weight, like wet wool hung on a nail. Milo stood until he couldn't, and then he folded, deliberate as a kneel. The world narrowed to the drum in his chest, and the taste of pine pitch on his tongue. Noah's hands were there, certain and loud with heat. And then the towel, and then the band of pressure that told the blood to stay home. Echo pressed her face to his cheek and took his shaking into her own. Inside, the table became a field hospital, lit by one stubborn lamp. Kate came in on boots that didn't make a sound. Her bag opened like a mouth that knew exactly which word to say. She spoke low and straight, the language of veins and gauze. And the room obeyed. Milo drifted there, under and over, riding the thin seam where pain loses its name. When the needle bit, he watched the ceiling grain swim into rivers. He caught the edge of Noah's breath, counting, bargaining, promising nothing he couldn't deliver except presence. Kate's palm steadied his jaw. "Easy, cat," she said, and the word wasn't a cage, it was a bridge. Somewhere the lamp hummed. Somewhere Scout laid his head on Noah's boot and refused to leave. Night deepened and softened. The bleeding slowed to a tired whisper. Milo slept in short dives, rising to the surface when logs shifted in the stove or when Echo sighed. Once he woke to silence so complete it was almost a sound, and in it he felt the shape of what he'd done, small body thrown at larger hunger, and the shape of what had held, which was everyone. Near dawn, the room unclenched, Snow started without ceremony, a clean eraser moving left to right across the window. Milo blinked, waited, and warm, his leg heavy with new rules. Noah poured coffee he didn't drink. Kate coiled her stethoscope and met Milo's eyes, like answering a question she wouldn't speak. The storm would lock them in, which felt like mercy. Before sleep finally found him, Milo tested the room with a single, small note, a thread of voice that checked each corner for danger and found only breath. Echo answered with the softest rumble, Ranger with stillness, Scout with the thud of a tail against chair rung. Milo let his ribs match that rhythm. The house took the beat and kept it for him until morning. Snow held the farm in quiet custody, a long white bandage over last night's harm. Milo woke inside it, sore but curious, the stitched heat of his wound tugging with each breath. He tested his paw, then the floorboards, then the distance to the stove glow. Echo's gaze tracked him like a lighthouse, steady, sweeping, ready to guide him back if pain veered the room. He ate in small, serious mouthfuls, then slept with his chin on Ranger's foreleg, borrowing steadiness. By afternoon, the window squared out a slice of sun. In it, dust lifted and fell like soft prey. Milo batted the moving light, practiced the old mathematics. Crouch, measure, spring, freeze. The world handed him harmless lessons, and he took them all and kept them. When the storm broke, scent flooded the cracks. Cold cedar, wet wire, feather. A blue jay stuttered along the fence, too busy with victory to watch its shadow. Milo felt the switch flip inside him. Not thought, but current. He slid from rug to sill to step, thinner than his own intention, a whisper moving toward the bright carelessness beyond the porch rail. Noah called him back once, a low note of caution, and for 2 heartbeats it worked. Then the jay dropped to the ground, and arrogance made it heavy. Milo flowed through the gap in the door, like poured smoke. Outside, the air cut clean in his lungs. He crossed 10 yards in 4 breaths, and landed where the bird had been. He felt the ground meet him, a line in a story writing itself. Feathers lifted in a blue shrug, late to everything. Milo adjusted in air, tail scissoring, paws closing on the living flutter. The shock of contact rang up his bones like a struck rail. He pinned, bit, released, bit again, confused by the way the world argued between mercy and instinct. The bird went still, and silence made a hard, bright sound around them. He stood panting, tiny chest hammering, fur salted with sky. The dogs had stopped at the porch, a line that meant family and rules. Noah reached them a beat later, eyes holding too many truths at once. Milo looked down at what he'd done, and then up to the man, searching his face for a shape to fit the moment and the wildness he had made. Between hearth and bone, he trembled and stood. Noah said nothing, which said everything. He knelt, palm open, no anger, only the ache of a door he knew must open soon. He lifted the jay with a square of burlap and carried both loss and lesson to the trees. Milo followed halfway, then sat in the brittle grass, body buzzing with a victory that didn't feel like his to keep or claim. The field went thin and far, a kind of farewell practicing. Inside, Kate cleaned the bandage and watched the wild ride his pupils. "He's healing," she said, and softer and remembering. Milo leaned into the rim of the crate, not hiding, merely choosing a smaller sky with clear edges. The house felt narrower now, the corners speaking in low voices. Echo's tail thumped once, a vote to stand beside, not in front. That evening, the harmonica found a different key. The dogs kept their harmony, patient and low. But Milo's note came thinner, pulled by something beyond the porch light. He tasted the door with his whiskers and stared through his reflection into the field. The fence did not look like safety. It looked like a sentence said kindly, and somehow it hurt worse. Headlights swam up the lane, slow as thought. Sheriff Wade's truck shouldered the dark and idled bones deep. The kitten crouched, not from guilt, but from the old math of big noises and human posture. On the porch, words clicked like latches, permits, violations, 24 hours to comply. No shouting, just the geometry of rules closing around a small beating point. When the truck left, it took some of the heat with it. Noah stood in the doorway with his hand on the jamb, as if the house might decide to run. Kate's face held both relief and challenge. Milo came close, touched his nose to Echo's, and felt the message pass. Here is now, and now is enough. Outside, the moon rehearsed its climb and waited. The porch boards answered with a tired creak. Later, when the lamp thinned and the stove found its slow breath, Noah set the harmonica down and spoke only once. "If you belong out there," he said to no one and to everything, "I won't make you smaller to keep you." Milo answered, the way his kind does. He lay where door and hearth divided the floor and slept with one paw in each world until dawn. Evening settled like a shawl over the porch, the stove ticking in its drowsy language. Milo lay where warm wood met the cool seam of the door, eyes half-lidded, ears busy. The house smelled of coffee and leather and the faint iron of bandage glue. Beyond the rails, the pasture held its breath, and the moon shouldered up slow, a coin rubbed smooth by weather. The day's ultimatum hung quiet but heavy, a paperweight no one touched. Milo felt it in the way the dogs moved Ranger tidier in his pacing, Scout softer at corners, Echo closer than usual. He rose and crossed the room in a figure eight, brushing each ribcage with whiskers, the way his kind counts family. The floorboards learned his weight and promised to remember. Headlights wrote a brief sentence across the far trees and vanished. Kate arrived without knocking, canvas bag in one hand, steadiness in the other. Milo watched her kneel, smelled cold air clinging to wall, riverstone, a clean, careful fear. She set a small case on the table, something that clicked softly, and left it closed, as if choice had its own good manners. Her palm found the hush between Milo's shoulders, reading muscle and stitch, warmth and will. "He can make it," she said to the room, not declaring, just offering a door. "If you love him past this house, let him leave awake." The dogs listened like jurors. Noah kept his eyes on the hinge of the back door, a man measuring the distance between safety and mercy. When the kettle sighed, Noah wiped the harmonica dry and waited, asking permission of a silence older than his voice. The first note went out thin and silver, touching windows and the inside of hands. Ranger hummed low. Scout joined, tail drumming once. Milo lifted his head and let the sound walk his spine. Each vertebra waking like towns along a night train. Noah opened the back door. Cold pulled at the threshold and climbed his sleeves. The gate latch answered with a small, stubborn click that sounded like history changing its mind. Milo stepped forward and stopped. The edge of the rug caught under one paw. He looked at Echo, the old map, and Echo nodded with the slow blink that says go and brings you back in the same breath. Moonlight made a road across frost. Milo followed it 2 careful paces, then 3, then the free space found his lungs. He tested air like a new word, rolled it once, again, and felt the field lift under him. Behind, wood and man and dogs kept their geometry. Ahead, darkness wrote generous invitations he could read without letters. He turned and touched Ranger first, cheek to cheek, then Scout, forehead to brow. The greeting of animals who have slept in one heartbeat. Echo he pressed longer against, sharing a thread of warmth that ran both ways and belonged to neither. When he pulled back, the night shifted closer, as if listening for the version of him that had always been a little farther ahead. The harmonica found a deeper bend. Milo answered without meaning to, a roughened ribbon of sound that climbed until it met the dog's note and braided. Not a howl, not yet, a learning. The field, patient and wide, held it. He tried again, and the voice inside him stepped up, sure-footed, finding a ledge where there had been only air. The braid tightened and flashed in moon grey. Noah didn't call him back. He lowered the harmonica and let breath be enough. Go on, son, he said into the space between man and wild, the words walking without hurry. Milo met his gaze, and something passed that didn't need explaining. Gratitude without debt, love without leash. He pivoted lightly and slid under the bottom rail, the way water decides a direction. Grass stitched the world to his belly. The fence line released its sentence and became a line break. He trotted, then loped, then let the trot own him again, measured, modest, saving. Scent unrolled mice in the briar, fox along the ditch, a doe's sweet coin laid across the wind. Far off, an owl wrote a period at the end of a cedar and waited for the page to turn. Halfway to the rise, Milo stopped and sent one clear note up the hill. A voice exactly his cat, yes, but shaped by nights of harmony until the edges had learned to hold light. From the porch, Ranger and Scout answered, echoing the line like family name. Echo added a low thread, the old keel that keeps the small boat upright while the river practices teeth. Kate stood with her arms folded tight against cold, eyes shining the way goodbyes sharpen them. Noah's hand found the door jamb, then fell. Be larger than this roof, he said, almost smiling, letting the ache spend itself into something clean. In the field, Milo tested his leg, found it true, and moved until the house became a scent instead of a shape. On the ridge, he paused and looked back. The porch lamp tipped a little gold into the yard. The dogs were there, and the man and the woman who had learned to say yes by saying less. Milo filled his chest and let a long, steady call unspool. It crossed the pasture and threaded the doorway and nested in rafters, and for a breath the house sang him back. Then he went, not vanishing so much as joining. Grass closed, shadows reorganized to include his outline. The harmonica lay quiet on the table, cooling towards silence. In the doorway, Noah exhaled and left the door ajar a few extra seconds, as if the night might choose to slip in and rest. Milo's paw prints stitched the frost like neat handwriting until the hill folded them gently away. Winter learned new ways to be quiet. The porch lamp burned earlier, the stove breathed deeper, and the house relearned how to live with fewer footsteps. Out beyond the rise, the bobcat kept to the cedar seam and the wind-carved gullies, soft-footed where snow remembered everything. He moved like a rumour the hills told themselves when men slept. He stitched a small territory out of blackberry thickets and deer beds, a map made of scent and habit. At dawn he walked the frozen creek, reading tracks like letters, translating rabbit into angles and time. He was leaner now and certain. The boy soft in him cooled into edge and balance. Hunger taught clean lines. Winter taught which ones to follow. Some nights he hunted only by listening to how silence leaned. A vole tunneled wrong, and the earth betrayed it with a hollow note. He dropped through white and rose with red on his whiskers. Not proud, not cruel, just correct. The moon watched without praise. In the far field, a barn light flicked and went dim. A heartbeat he would not chase. On the third winter he found the ridge where wind sings metal, the old fence line bright with rhyme. He sat there until the sun loosened, watching the farm become an idea more than a place. The porch, the dogs, the man memory wore their shapes like a coat that still carried a faint, warm scent. He swallowed it once and let it pass. Back at the house, Ranger was gone. Scout moved like a good song, slowed down, careful at corners, nails clicking a truth nobody argued. Noah tuned quiet instead of strings. When Kate came, she put wood by the door and left with fewer words. On clear nights he held the harmonica and didn't lift it, listening for a note the hill might send first. Spring unfastened the cold with wet hands. The bobcat traded bone-hard hunger for work that tasted of rain flush a rabbit from ragweed, set a patient paw on a stump, study the field for a mistake. He learned the midges under order and the way trout turn at shadows. He learned, too, that thunder has feet before it has a voice. Once, close to dark, he cut a wide circle around the farm. Scout lifted his muzzle and found a thread of him, a single strand on the wind. The dog's tail moved once. Old Joy rehearsed in half-time. From the oak's shadow, the bobcat watched the porch light lift gold into the first mosquitoes and lowered himself back into brush without touching memory to pain. Summer tasted of ironweed and dust. Heat made afternoons thin and wavering. He slept where grapevines knotted shade and rose when cicadas clicked open like pocket watches. A young fox shadowed him for 2 days and left wiser. He took quail with the same respect he gave water, never twice from the same corner, never loud enough to teach the wrong lesson. By fall, his coat held the colour of wheat before rain. He wore his scars like closed doors, and his silence like a tool that always fit his hand. When elk bugled across the far slope, he stopped to listen, not for prey, but for belonging, the kind that doesn't ask your name, only whether your feet remember the old steps when the ground turns dark. On a windless night, he climbed the same snag where owls write their last sentences and looked toward the farm. The house had fewer lights now, and the porch swing didn't move unless wind insisted. He let a small sound out, not a call, not a claim, just a measure of distance. The hill folded it once and gave it back, softer than it left. Snow came early, the year Scout's gait shortened to inches. The bobcat followed deer into fur and learned how a herd shares warmth without surrendering what. He took from winter what winter offered and left what made more life. At a fence post, Sheriff Wade's hat scent ghosted tire rubber and tobacco. The bobcat read it and stepped sideways into older trees. In the thaw, hunger eased and habit stayed. He began to cross the creek where stones kept their backs dry, and rehearsed a path that led not to a door, but to an edge where light from a kitchen never quite reached. If the harmonica rose, he stilled not to answer, only to remember the shape his breath once took when song asked, and how night held it. Years rounded his face and sharpened his eyes. He moved with the thrift of things that had proved themselves and no longer needed witness. When wind travelled the pasture just right, the dogs he had sung with seemed near again, their notes braided into the rustle of broom sedge. He let the memory stand beside him like weather, and then he walked on. The first snow fell like quiet advice, covering fence wire and hoof ruts until the yard forgot what rushed through it. Scout moved in half steps, careful and loyal to the floor. Out past the rise, the bobcat kept to fur, shadow, weight light, breath steady. He tested the valley with his nose and found the old shapes: ash, smoke, coffee, leather. The dog he once sang beside. Wind slid off the ridge and made a low throat sound in the cattails. He stood in it, listening the way his kind listens, measuring not volume but intent. The moon lifted clean, a silver coin struck sharp, and the field shifted from grey to something like memory. He could have kept moving. Instead, he turned to the narrow path that knew his feet by heart. At the porch, Noah's lamp burned small and faithful, a star someone remembered to polish. Through the screen, Scout raised his head, ears catching what the years hadn't taken. The bobcat halted behind cedar and waited for the house to finish its breath. No hurry, the night was wide enough. Behind him, two shapes steadied, young, spotted, and new to windows. He touched noses with the first kit, then the second, and felt their tremble smooth out. They knew rabbit and foal, hawk shadow and bramble doorways, but not this hush where men live. He leaned his shoulder to theirs, saying without words, "Listen to the square of light, to older beats." They settled, whiskers forward, pupils wide, as coins turned toward sun. Inside, Noah stood with one hand on the jamb, watching Scout measure the world by scent. The man did not call, did not make himself larger. He let the house be a quiet instrument. The bobcat stepped from cedar, body low, certainty high. Snow took him gently, catching each paw and giving it back improved. He halted where porch shadow and mooncut met. He gave a small sound, not a claim, but a question. It travelled across the yard and rang the porch rail like a tuning fork. Scout answered with a rumble, old and worn, but true as winter's edge. The kits stiffened, then eased, learning that doors can respond without teeth. The bobcat's ears flicked once, filing away the answer as proof that memory breathes. He moved closer, a respectful arc rather than a straight line, and sat in the blue of the cold. The kits watched the man's hands, the stillness of them, the way he kept them open and visible. The bobcat lifted his head and let a longer ribbon of voice unwind. It began low, the pitch of sap in frozen pine, then climbed until frost felt warm for a breath. Scout found the note he used to hold and carried it carefully, as if ferrying light. Their voices braided dog and cat, winter and heat, yesterday and the start of something else. The kits looked from father to porch and back, then tried small notes of their own. The first fell apart, the second clung. The third found a ledge and stayed. For a minute that had no clock in it, the yard held choir. The fence forgot its job and became a staff line. Porch posts listened like old friends. Noah closed his eyes, not to miss it, but to keep it from scattering. He felt the song move through him and sink into the boards, into the nails, into the house that had learned to want nothing and finally received. The bobcat stood and crossed to the bottom step, no closer. He bowed his head once, a motion like wind agreeing with a tree, and the kits copied him in clumsy grace. Scout's tail tapped twice, the slow drum of approval. The man's mouth lifted, not smile exactly, just release the face a door makes when someone it knows knocks soft and sure. A nighthawk slipped the edge of the field, and the kit's eyes found it, the wild always ready to continue the lesson. The bobcat touched each shoulder with his whiskers, then swiveled toward the rise. He sent one last note, clear, clean, whole, and the porch returned it like a promise. Behind him, the kits stepped in his prints as if they were warm. Snow whispered as they climbed, thin, content. Halfway up, he stopped and looked back at the square of light. Scout eased down, breath steadying to sleep's slow rule. Noah leaned against the frame, a silhouette curated by years. The bobcat held the scene in his eyes until it fit, then let it go, the way rivers release sky after learning it. On the ridge, wind found him friend-shaped and pressed a little closer. He led the kits into fir shadow and listened once more. From the porch, no harmonica rose, only a house breathing and a dog dreaming. It was enough. He stepped into the dark that knew his name and showed the kits how to move through it without leaving anything broken behind. Dawn unstitched the night without hurry, a pale wash over cedar tips and the quiet porch. The bobcat moved the ridge like a brush on paper, pads placing commas in the frost. Behind him, two young ones learned the grammar of caution and grace. The farm below breathed a steady line. He paused to listen, not for danger, but for what was left to finish. He guided the kits to a blowdown warmed by last year's leaves, showed them how shadows carry scent and how silence has edges. Their whiskers wrote notes into the air. When the wind turned, the house arrived. Smoke, old leather, dog sleep, He let the smell pass through him like a hymn returning to its first key, and the kits watched his face to read the lesson. Down at the porch, Scout's world had narrowed to simple lanes: bed, bowl, door, the square of sun. He woke to a rumour of what had once been crowd and chorus. Noah stood with coffee untouched, the steam already giving up. He didn't ask the morning to be more than it was. The harmonica lay where a hand could find it, and chose not to, not yet. The bobcat waited until the slope remembered his weight. He came with the day, not against it. A thread pulled true. The kits followed, ears high, learning that courage is quieter than hunger. At the fence he slowed and made a gentle arc, giving the house space to think. Snow lifted under his paws and settled again without complaint. Scout saw him first, as if the years bowed and made a clear lane to recognition. He tried to rise and couldn't, so he wagged, a small drum that still kept time. Noah stepped to the jam and stayed, hands open. The bobcat stopped at the bottom step, the place the night blessed before it turned back into wood, and set his gaze level. He sent a low note to carry his name across the boards. It reached Scout like hands that remember how to lift. The old dog answered with a breath shaped into sound, thin but true. The kits startled, then steadied, ears swiveling to catch the braid. The bobcat climbed one more step, not closer, just enough to teach the next measure. Noah lifted the harmonica and let one clean tone walk out ahead of him, slow and kind. The bobcat's voice rose to meet it, fuller now, a river that knew its banks. The kits tried, failed, tried again, found a narrow ledge and held. For a brief minute, nobody needed words. Dog, man, cat, 3 histories braided into a single spendthrift chord. The peak passed like weather, quiet opened, wider than before. Noah laid the harmonica down, as if setting a warm stone on cold ground. He knelt until his eyes were level with the bobcat's, and whispered thank you without sound. Scout closed his eyes and stayed in the room by choosing to breathe it, not fight it. The kits watched how endings can be soft and still be full. Snow began with the small confidence of ash falling. The bobcat turned to the young ones and touched each head, a benediction made of whisker and warmth. He stepped into the yard and pressed a paw into thawed mud where an old print waited. The fit was sure. He placed the kit's paws after his, showing how to stand where story and earth agree. Kate's truck eased up the lane and stopped without horn. She took the porch steps with quiet feet, eyes catching the shape of the scene and holding it like glass. She didn't speak, only reached for Scout's collar and stroked memory into fur. The bobcat watched her hands and blinked, slow, respectful, then looked again to Noah. Satisfied the count was complete, he led the kits back toward the rise, then paused and sent one last long call across the pasture. It gathered the fence posts, the porch swing, the empty chair, and braided them once more around the old dog's breath. The sound came back smaller and sweeter, the way music often does when walls learn it. He accepted the echo and let it pass through the kits. At the ridge, wind laid itself along his side like an old friend. He looked down one more time. Noah's head was bowed, not in prayer, just in thanks. The kind men give the day when it does its job. Scout's chest rose and fell evenly, the housekeeping tempo. The bobcat turned, carrying the measure forward, and the kits followed into trees that made room. By dusk, the first stars stitched their neat work over the farm. The bobcat found a cedar root and rested, Kits nested warm at his ribs. He listened across distance for the small, familiar dog sound and caught it Sleep's soft engine, still running. He breathed out the answer he had carried for years. The hills kept it, the way hills do, and no part of it broke. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe, there are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.